Hello, welcome to WANZ Talks, the podcast of We Are Not Zombies. I'm your host, Ramiro, and today we are super fucking excited because we have here with us in the studio this human born in Houston, Texas. He's an author, a journalist, a documentary filmmaker, an activist, a storyteller, a dissident, a musician, a traveler, an anarchist, an explorer, a free thinker, Derrick Broze. How are you, brother?
I'm doing great, brother. I like that. I like that intro. Thank you.
We're very happy to be speaking with you. And precisely today that you just put out this new book, right?
Yeah, so I released the original version in 2020, and today, as we're talking, I just released the second edition update, new chapters, new info.
We're talking about how to opt out of the technocratic state, o in Spanish, cómo salir voluntariamente del estado tecnocrático. Derrick, let's start precisely by that. People might hear technocratic and maybe we lose them right there, you know? They're just like, what's that? So what is a technocratic state and why are we living that situation right now?
Sure. So a technocratic state, it's a phrase that I put together based on what I think we're dealing with. You know, when we look around the world, we see governments, which is a state, whether that's the Mexican government, U.S. government, whatever, right? That's a state. And then you have this philosophy that seems to be guiding a lot of the actions, especially taken the last couple of years during COVID times. And specifically, that's a philosophy that believes that technology should guide everything, that the experts or the technocrats should be the ones to make decisions. Maybe people have become familiar the last couple of years, especially in the United States, and I think everywhere, trust the experts, trust the science. That very much comes from the technocratic philosophy. So in the United States and Canada, in like the mid to late 1800s, there were these groups. One of them was called Technocracy Incorporated. And this was the beginning of an idea that would later in like the 1920s, 1930s become popular. It had like its period where it was like very popular. And the idea of technocracy is that rule by experts, rule by technology. Just like democracy, demos is the people, rule by the people is the idea. In this case, it's rule by technology, rule by experts, the people who guide the technology. And the technocratic philosophy basically says that me and you are too dumb to know what's best for us. What we need is the experts and their technology and their tools, because they'll be able to better manage society and centrally plan and make decisions for all of us, right? And so, I mean, it's a repackaged idea that basically says people aren't smart enough to know what's good for them. And it was really popular in the US and Canada in the 1920s and 30s. A lot of people don't know this, but Elon Musk's grandfather was in the Canadian Technocratic Party, the Social Credit Party back and then. At that time, he was promoting this idea, but it pretty much disappeared. And like if you look it up in the history pages in the Wikipedia and stuff, it'll say that it was popular at that time and then it went away. But what I believe and what I write in the book is that this philosophy has actually been quietly guiding the world that we're seeing, especially now that we're in a time of artificial intelligence, social credit scores, like things in China we can talk about, facial recognition cameras more and more, especially in places like the U.S., but even here in Mexico City and parts of Mexico, we're starting to see it happen. And generally, yeah, the idea that technology should guide every decision, that it's sort of just an assumed thing that we're always going to use digital technology as the path forward, and that we should look to people like, in this case, it would be Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, these people who aren't presidents, they're not in the government per se, but they're extremely wealthy and they run tech companies that have a lot of power and know a lot about all of us because of social media and things like that. And so effectively, they're able to work around governments and change the world and get things done. And so that's like what a technocracy is. And to me, especially again, looking at COVID and seeing how influential somebody like Bill Gates was, despite not being a doctor, right? It's just like we're looking to this expert for help. Governments are listening to his advice. His money is funding the World Health Organization, things like that. That's the behavior of a technocrat. And the fact that the world is basically listening shows you that we're living in a technocracy or a technocratic state.
The idea of trusting the experts, it's something that it's taught to us since school. You go to school and they start telling you how mathematics works, how physics, astrology, the world, everything is set up, and how there are these experts and these scientifics and these people with credits, social credits, that they already certify the information that we're getting, so we should trust that, and that's what makes us be educated, prepared for the world. Not necessarily the attitude of questioning or the human impulse of trusting your instinct, right? So somehow, once listening to you, feels like, well, yeah, but we are funneled into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that points to a fundamental problem in most of the world, which is that you have state-run, government-run schools, what I prefer to call indoctrination centers, which teach people to trust the experts, to don't question the science and things like that, right?
The information.
It's just to be repeaters, right? And I actually have a documentary series called The Pyramid of Power, and if anybody who's interested, we put out an episode on big education, and it's in Espanol as well. And it talks about the origins of the modern education system. And it's not just the U.S., it's the same model that used everywhere. And basically, the short version is the Rockefeller Institution created foundations, and they said, this is the best way to educate your kids. And over time, they've been able to kind of make that become the policy that is used in country after country after country. And so there are now countries in the world, for example, somebody told me the other day they live in Greece and it's illegal to homeschool. So they can't even homeschool their own kids, right? Some parts of the world already have gone that far. And it's because they recognize, I mean, think about this. When you give your kid over to the public education system, you're giving them 5 days a week for sometimes 8 hours a day from 6 to 18 at the most impressionable time in their life. You're giving these people more time with your kid than you spend, right? And I understand, like, there's a lot of different, it's not easy. I'm not here to say it's easy just to homeschool and things like that. There's a lot of people who are struggling and they can't afford to do that. And, it's easy just to like, okay, I'll let the government educate my kids. But a lot of it comes down to that they have created this belief that we think that if you don't have a high school diploma, then you're not, obviously not smart. And if you don't have a college degree, then you're not anybody, right? Things like that. It's definitely that way in the US, and I think increasingly around the world, this idea that if you don't have those pieces of paper, that you don't have the letters next to your name, which is what the experts have, then clearly you're not smart enough to know what's going on, right? And so we saw that big time with COVID. Anybody who wasn't a doctor or a scientist, or even if you were a doctor or a scientist and you had the wrong opinion, it's like, no, you're wrong, right? But definitely, let's say average people like me and you, well, you're not a doctor. Why should I listen to you? You clearly don't know better than this doctor. And it's a very disempowering belief system, and it works right in with the technocracy because they want us to believe that the experts know better than us. And there's nothing wrong inherently with the idea of an expert, right? Like, so you've been working in film for a long time, right? You could be an expert in that, and maybe if I'm working on a project, I'm going to ask you some questions because I trust your advice, right? But that doesn't mean I give up my own critical thinking, right? So you can listen to what Anthony Fauci says or what AMLO says or what whoever says and still make a different decision. It doesn't mean you have to do what they say, but a critically thinking person considers all the information. And what they're saying is, no, don't look over here, don't look over here, just trust what we're saying. That's all you need to do. And you're right, it starts with the school at the youngest age. That's when they start trying to get in our heads and teach us this idea.
So at what point did you started changing your way of thinking?
I think I've probably always been skeptical, just like I was like what do they say, like a rebel without a cause, like at a young age. Like I definitely think I just didn't trust government per se, but not any kind of educated, like where I could explain why. It was just like, yeah, fuck the police, kind of thing. More of like teenage rebellion or something like that, And I was always into weird ideas ever since I was a young kid, like UFOs or just anything, just studying things that like society told me were not real or fake. It intrigued me more than anything. So I think I had that kind of critically thinking spirit, but it really didn't, I think, really fully bloom or open up until my super early 20s. I got addicted to drugs when I was 19 and 20 when I was living in Houston, Texas. And I basically I ended up getting arrested and going to prison when I was 20. I turned 21, locked up. And that was the beginning of me kind of reevaluating everything I was doing. I was already I had some experiences with psychedelics that had kind of, like acid specifically and mushrooms, that got me thinking like maybe there's more going on than I'm being told by the average world. So I kind of had that skepticism, but it wasn't until I got locked up and I had that like gut check of realizing like that I was just that I didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't know who I was really. I didn't know what I was up to. The drugs were just a way for me to kind of deal with a lot of personal trauma and stuff I didn't know how to deal with as a young kid, because I come from a family of drug addicts and alcoholics who've all been to prison. I grew up visiting my father in prison. So it was a lot of this stuff that I didn't know how to deal with. Then I started getting high, using heavy drugs, coke, meth, things like that. And it made me think maybe this was, the answer. And obviously very quickly I realized it wasn't the answer. And I ended up, I got sober, but I was just in that world of dealing drugs and stuff. And so I ended up getting locked up. And when I got locked up, I started meditating. I discovered meditation. Like once I accepted that they sentenced me to a year, that I wasn't going to go anywhere for at least a year, I had to really just I started journaling, writing all the time and trying to figure out why the hell am I here? What did I do? How did I get on this path? And yeah, it was in that process that I started to get my grandmother at the time to send me books on meditation and just prayer. And I just started to open up that way. I'd been very not spiritual, I think kind of angry at God, so to speak, things like that. So I was finally kind of starting to open up of man, I need to heal this thing going on. And that was the beginning of a process that continues today. But that was really, I think, the thing that changed it. Because then once I got out of prison, I was a totally different person. I went back and forth for a couple of years, but I ended up doing 18 months in Texas state prisons. And I got out October 2008 as a free person. And it was just, my whole life had been changed. My way of thinking, I left behind a bunch of old friends and old habits. And I was really starting to begin this healing process. And that's just when I started to remember that I'm a smart person. I like to read. I like to learn. And also the depression and everything I'd been going through kind of had disappeared and it was gone. And so for the first time, I felt like I was really alive. I was 23, 24, and it felt like I was just finally seeing the world, if that makes any sense. Felt like I was a little kid again. I was just starting off. Everything had been, before that had just been this chaos, this depression, this sadness. And so in that new mindset, I just started to research, I just started digging into the world, and that led to my activism and eventually journalism. This is about 2010. I started an activist group in Houston and just started doing things, doing everything from building gardens and confronting the police, and then eventually started writing articles and doing all the things that I'm doing now. But yeah, it really started with first getting locked up.
So do you remember what were those first questions that you were having?
Yeah, the first things were related to the drug war. So it's interesting being from the U.S. and now living in Mexico, because the drug war affects both places in very different ways, and similar but also different ways. So in the United States, the government launched this drug war in the 60s and 70s. We're going to wipe out all the marijuana and cocaine and blah, blah, right? And it's been this massive propaganda campaign. We're talking about public education, right? So I don't know if it's the same in Mexico, but in U.S., when you're a little kid, they make you go to the DARE program and tell you all about how bad drugs are. It's just from the very beginning, you're hearing this kind of stuff. And there's no difference about cannabis being a medicine. It's it's all drugs. It's all bad, right? So over there, we're being indoctrinated to believe that people who use drugs or do those things are bad people. Not that they're sick people or people who need help, like myself. I didn't need to be locked up in a cage. I needed some some therapy or something, some real help to help me through my shit. And so we see it as people over in the U.S., they lose their freedom for drugs, they get locked up, right? And then I don't know, just the way that world, the drug world, impacted me personally was that I got pulled into a whole world that I wasn't familiar with, that I wasn't prepared for. And it totally rapidly changed everything that I went through. So when I got out, I wanted to know more about the drug war itself, because now I'm I've been a part of it. Now I went to prison, because even though today, I don't think anybody should be using crystal meth. Personally, my philosophical beliefs is that people should have the freedom to put what they want in their bodies or not put in it, So I don't think I should have been put in prison for using crystal meth. Like I said, I should have been offered some help because I wasn't in a good place. I wasn't healthy for sure, but I don't think people should be put in cages for things like that. So when I got out and I was now out as a free person, I'm a felon in the U.S. I still am. So, for example, if I was to go back to the U.S. right now and apply for a job, even though this is 20 years ago, people would tell me we can't hire you because you're a felon. I can't get an apartment anywhere in Houston because I'm a felon. I was coming out and having all these new experiences where people were telling me, no, you can't work here. No, you can't get an apartment here because you're a felon. And in fact, in the U.S., they say you have a bullseye on your back, an X on your back, right? So anyways, I was going to the library all the time, applying for jobs, and I just started reading some of the books. And the first book I read was called Cannabis, A History. And it was all about the marijuana plant from the legal perspective of the drug war, from the chemical perspective of how cannabinoids work, and just all this. And it was very eye-opening to me, because I'd smoked weed before, but I never thought about it like, wow, like people should have freedom, like people shouldn't be locked up because of this. And also I learned that the drug war in the US was largely started because of racism, saying that like, oh, the Mexican migrant workers are getting high and they're attacking the women, or the black jazz musicians are going to steal the white women, just crazy stuff like that. But also it was based on trying to drive out the hemp industry, the oil. I mean, there's a lot of information that, and then that was like, wow, I was never taught this in high school. And that's when a light bulb went off in my head, like, holy shit, maybe there's other things that I wasn't taught. And that was kind of the beginning of me opening the door to like conspiracies and, just questioning everything basically,
I think that's one of the most important things when we are very little kids, when we just start growing up. We ask questions all the time, right? Everyone asks questions all the time, and everyone draws all the time. Before we start writing, we start drawing. That's the way we communicate, we express, and everything. And I feel those two things, precisely once you start getting into the whole life system, the traditional life system, they get lost in the way. There's people that keep painting, of course, and become probably great storytellers, artists, and whatnot. But many people stop drawing and they stop asking questions. Yeah. They just, because life is too hard, because the day is too long, because whatever reason they may or one might say, they're too tired to go that extra mile that it's needed to do the questions that you are talking about.
No, I think you're right. And I tend to feel maybe some of that's by design, that people are too tired, too exhausted, too stressed out to ask questions, because people have to make a living in the world we live in. They got to find a way to survive, and that everybody's hustling one way or the other, right? Whether you have to go out and sell stuff on the street or go to an office job you hate or work online all day, everybody's trying to make money and survive and create the life they want for themselves, which I totally get. Like I'm trying to do the same thing. And so it's a challenge to try to ask people to then like, hey, when you come home from being tired at work or from taking care of your kids or doing all this stuff, watch this video that's an hour long, read a book that's going to open your eyes. Like it's a lot to ask people, but I do think more and more people are curious. I mean, obviously there's so many people in the world, and it's hard to know, like, I don't even know if we need to quote unquote wake up everybody, right? Maybe like in the United States, there's this cliche that a lot of people talk about, and I don't know if it's historically accurate. I don't think it is, but they talk about the American Revolution, and they say that only 1/3 of the people actually supported it. That there was like 1/3 is just totally indoctrinated. People just going about their lives, just like we were saying, people tired working, and back then people were probably farmers or whatever. They're just busy living their lives. And then there was maybe 1/3 that was, hey, we support the king, we want this. But then there was the 1/3 that were like, no, this is not right, and we're gonna rise up and change. And so the idea is that you don't need everybody, right? So if we can get 10% of the population asking questions in a city, in a country, in the world, that can have a huge impact, because the vast majority of people aren't going to do anything. Like most people just go along with whatever's in front of them, right? Not saying they're bad or good, anything like that. It's just what most people do. They watch the TV shows that are put in front of them, the movies that are put in front of them, the books that are popular, they follow the trending things on Twitter. You know what I mean? Like they're kind of just, some people would say NPCs, like or zombies, right? Maybe. And I don't necessarily mean that in a detrimental way, but it's just they're not really questioning or looking deeper, right? Those people will generally just go along with what is there in front of them. So we saw that with COVID, for example. If people are told stay home or wear this thing or jump or whatever they say, there's a lot of people that are just going to go along with it because they think they're being a good person, or they don't want to upset anybody, or they don't want to, they don't want controversy, right? They don't want confrontation. So I think it really is up to those of us who do have inquisitive minds and critically thinking minds, and more importantly, who are trying to think of solutions for a lot of the problems our world is facing, not just individual countries, but the whole world, that, there's the potential for us to really do something really positive if this kind of questioning mentality, this consciousness continues to spread. It doesn't have to be every single person on the planet for change to shift,
How have you felt that change in the people that you meet, that you talk, that you've been connecting in your path in these years? How have you seen that technology and life itself has changed humanity, the people that you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as technology changing things, obviously it's 2022 going on 2023, right? And so the internet as we know it has been around still for less than 20 years. You know what I mean? Like social media, the iPhone came out in 2006, 2007, 2008. Facebook started in 2006, right? So these things haven't even been out for 20 years, which is crazy to imagine how rapidly and how much they've changed our world. The internet itself obviously was out in the 90s, but it didn't start to really hit where it is till the early to mid 2000s. And things are changing so rapidly, both in good and bad ways. Obviously, that's what I'm, worried about and talk about in my book. But I will say on the positive side of things that I was blessed enough to be a part of a really beautiful time with independent media and social media in the early 2010s up till probably about 2016, 2017, when a lot of the online censorship really started to kick into overdrive. Myself and some of the people I work with, different outlets, like I'll name a few, the Anti-Media, the Free Thought Project. These are Facebook pages, but also websites that at that time were, we could look up our analytics, our numbers, our website and the traffic numbers, and we were kicking CNN's ass every day. We were kicking we were reaching hundreds of millions of people a week through memes, through articles. At the height of it, we had enough traffic and ad revenue coming in to pay a full team of writers and editors and meme makers and graphics. And it was a beautiful time. We were able to, as silly as it might seem, build these pages to 4 or 5 million, 6 million followers. And just, we, part of the Anti-Media, for example, helped create the March Against Monsanto movement, which went all around the world, and other movements. And it really, to me, showed the possibility of what the best of social media can be, the best of the internet can be, spreading ideas and going from like one mind to the other and just transferring all over the world. And that was just such a special period. And to anybody who might have missed that, I was just having a conversation with a friend about this today. I don't know if we'll ever see that again, because the internet is very quickly all over the world becoming more and more sanitized. And I mean by that, like people are wiping and deleting information or they're attempting to, that they would like to hide and keep from the public, and I'll say specifically for places like Mexico, where a large portion of the population gets their internet access through a phone that is mainly WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram. And those, as we know, are censored platforms that sanitize information. So if that's somebody's only access to the mainstream world, it's already coming through a filter, right? And if somebody only uses Google to search for information, then it's only coming in a filter, right? And so that's where now we're kind of seeing the danger of some of these tools, where at one point we were reaching millions of people and spreading information. And October 2018, all these pages I'm talking about were deleted on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. This is the beginning, even pre-COVID. We saw a lot of censorship during COVID for people talking about the wrong opinions, but it was happening well before then. Not as many people were paying attention, but there was already shadow banning, there was already deletions. And in October 2018, 500 of the biggest pages were deleted, including everybody that I worked for. And basically when that happened, we lost all of our funding. A lot of these teams that were writing every day, writers focusing on geopolitics and health and all kinds of areas, gone. All of it's gone now. Not all of it, but I would say 90% of the people that I knew back then in 2012 to say 2017, 18 are no longer able to survive doing this anymore, because they've been demonetized through PayPal or Patreon, or Google won't let them serve ads, or their websites were deleted, or they were censored. And after a while, if you're not reaching anybody, as you know, it's kind of hard to keep funding your operations if you don't have some other secondary source of income. So I've seen both the good, like this beautiful moment where we were reaching millions and millions of people, and then now seeing how it's changing our lives in a very negative way, that it's getting harder and harder for people. Like if you're just an average person, and let's say you don't know my content, you're not listening to a podcast like this, and you just go search, just as one example, are the COVID shots hurting people? You're going to get one side of the story, right? And we all know what side of the story. That's the official story. Trust the experts, etc., right? And that's just one topic, but it shows you right away that they have already created this bubble, a matrix that most people live in, and they're not even aware of it. Even though we're physically occupying the same space, we're essentially living in different worlds, because the information we're consuming is different, and thus our understanding of the world around us is different, and it's pretty fucking trippy.
That's precisely that smart grid technology,
yeah,
right? That it's mentioned in the book, that it's also called the algorithm, but we are all surrounded by that technocracy and that way of limit the way we connect, or the information that we get. That it's precisely, and we go back to the book, because it is not only about talking what's happening and understanding it. It's also about giving answers and having options and having the possibility of thinking outside of the box. Here in WANZ, in We Are Not Zombies, we like to say not to think outside of the box, but rather we need to break the box, or burn the box, or step on the box, destroy the box. We should not respect the box, because the box signifies everything: the system, the rules, the opposites that we are thrown every day. So yeah, tell me more about this. How do you find, and what kind of answers do you share?
Yeah, so I appreciate you mentioning that. I mean, you're right. The book it touches on some of this, especially this new edition I'm reaching. It talks about, that I'm releasing now, it talks about the COVID times and all this stuff, but it's not a book that's focused on the problems. It's about the solutions. And that's pretty much what my work, the Freedom Cell Network, which is a part of the book too, is always focused on solutions. And thankfully, there are solutions for all this stuff we're facing. I mean, everything we just described, it's very scary, and it's even worse than we're not even getting fully deep. But when you really understand, like, especially in places, for example, like where I come from in Houston, where you already have facial recognition cameras installed, thousands of cameras around the entire Centro area, like where you have cops watching 24 hours a day, cataloging your face. The U.S. just announced in the next 6 months, you're not going to be able to fly without letting them scan your face. These are the kinds of things, like, it's going to become more and more restrictive, and we have to make decisions about how we're going to interact with the technology. And so that's one of the big things that the book asks, is for each person reading and anybody listening to think, like, I'm not sitting here necessarily saying you need to give up everything, although eventually we might want to consider that. I mean, and it's going to be hard, but at the very least, have a conversation and think about your relationship with technology, right? Do you automatically need to always get the latest phone or the latest upgrade? Because maybe that's not necessary, right? Because also, for one, working with Apple, Google, Microsoft, the big tech companies, these companies all have agreements with the United States intelligence agencies. They have backdoors in every one of these computers, every one of these phones. They can access anything that you have. That's all, like, there's no conspiracy about that. That's documented fact. All those programs have been put out there, but they've created monopolies, right? So if you want to go to the local store to buy a computer, that's all you're going to see. Google, Microsoft, Apple, etc. They've cornered the market. So you have to now go out of your way, for example, with technology, computers and cell phones, to try to actually find something, that's not going to do that. So I'm asking people to reconsider our relationship with digital technology, but also to recognize that the world that they're building and that we are racing towards, and, they talk about Agenda 2030. This is something that Mexicans are going to be hearing more and more about, because I'm seeing more and more Agenda 2030 propaganda. The Mexican government has an Agenda 2030 page and a document they released recently. It comes from the United Nations, and without getting too deep into it, it's basically just they're selling this idea that they're going to take care of the planet, save the climate, and all this stuff. But what it's really about is getting everybody on the grid, right? So in Mexico and in, let's say, India and parts of the so-called developing world, many people use cash, as you know, like cash is everywhere. But there's also a push slowly coming in, especially in the bigger cities, to get rid of cash. And, like we saw this during COVID, no more menus. Oh, we're not taking cash anymore. That's all a part of the same push. They want a digital ID society. You can't go anywhere without this digital identity, with a cashless society that they can, so that means they could track everything you spend. They could turn it off if they wanted. They could, like, for example, if you're saying the wrong things on the internet, right now it's like you get deleted, maybe you lose your job, but in this future, it might mean you can't buy groceries this week because your social credit score is too low and you didn't get enough tokens from the central bank digital currency that, for example, the Mexican government announced they're going to start studying in 2024. Like, so even in Mexico, these ideas are starting to creep in. Yeah. And so what I'm saying is their plan is 2030. We're going into 2023 right now. They are working night and day, every single day, with almost every single government in the world, nearly every major corporation in the world, to bring their vision of 2030, which is this technocratic state that I'm describing. And so we need to think, like, are we just going to sit here and kind of be swept up in it? Because doing nothing is not enough, like, in my view. If you just sit and be passive and, like, share videos on the internet or complain or just throw your hands up, you're going to get swept into this, because sooner or later you won't be able to work without the ID. You won't be able to get your bank money out of the bank without, it being digital. Or maybe there's another pandemic, or now they're also talking about climate lockdowns, that when COVID happened, nobody was driving and it was so much better for the planet. So now we just need to maybe periodically lock everybody in their homes to save the climate, right? These are all ideas that are already being discussed about. I write about this in the new update to the book. And so these decisions that I'm proposing, I will say right off the bat, they are not easy. None of the things I put, I mean, some of them are basic, like, hey, stop using Google, use a different search engine. That's one small step. Like, there's some little things like that you could do. But most of them require fundamental lifestyle changes. Like the idea that that for people to think that we can live our old lives and just keep doing that as the world races towards this digital technocracy, I think that's not very wise. I don't think it's going to be possible, honestly. And I think especially in places like Mexico City and Houston, it's going to be more and more hard to stay free from that system, right? Because as these major cities become smart cities, where it's 5G towers everywhere and it's all digital identities and the cameras are tracking, you know, they're going to sell it to everybody like it's convenient, right? These cameras are just going to watch your face so that now when you walk into the store, you don't even have to pay anymore. We'll automatically see your face, we'll scan it, and we'll deduct it from your bank account. It'll be so convenient.
Life easier.
Yeah, it's going to make everything smooth and easy. And, you know, so many people are going to buy this, of course. Like, people are already, like, people love convenience. They're going to sell it to people about convenience, entertainment, saving the planet, whatever they have to do to get people to go along with it. And again, most people, they just go along. They're not going to like, hey, wait, what is, you know, all of a sudden people just, okay, I guess I have to use this now, right? But those of us who see what's happening and can see the bigger picture, and in case I haven't made it clear, this world means the end of individual liberty, the end of privacy. And that they've said in their own words that in 2030 and beyond, there will not be privacy. The great reset phrase, you own nothing and be happy, right? That's what they want us to believe. And what I'm saying is it doesn't have to be that way. We can create another path, but we need to start like yesterday and basically start saying, am I going to keep using these systems? What's going to happen, just as one example that I'll put forward? Let's say that all your money's in the bank account right now, which is a lot of people. Personally, I haven't used the bank since 2008. I don't have an ID. I don't pay taxes in the U.S. Don't tell anyone. And, you know, I've removed myself from those systems as much as possible just by not playing their game, right? Because I don't want to feed that machine. And also because I know the more ingrained I am in that system, the harder it's going to be. I mean, it's already very hard, right? You can't necessarily, and in the US at least, a lot of places you can't get an apartment without having a credit card already, or some kind of, they've already got you built into the system. Even if, so for me, who's somebody who doesn't have a tax record, who doesn't have a license, who has a felony, who doesn't have a bank history, I basically can't get rented an apartment anywhere in Houston because as far as they're concerned, I don't exist, right? But why is that? Is because, again, like you said earlier, since birth, we've been indoctrinated to believe that without paperwork, a digital, you know, an ID, you're not a person, right? You're undocumented. You're not even a real person. That's why people, for example, coming from Mexico, go to the US, they aspire to get the paperwork because it's like, oh, now I'm a person, I'm accomplished, right? And what I'm trying to say, and the philosophy behind this, is that there's actually strength outside of the system. You know, so many Mexicans and folks in India and other parts of the world are already outside of the system because they don't pay taxes or they deal in cash every day. And the government has no idea of how much, I mean, this is probably $1 trillion economy all around the world. This is what I talk about. It's called the counter economy or the informal economy, the underground economy, right? And the guy that inspired me, he passed in 2004. He's basically, his philosophy was that if we encourage people to get out of the systems and to use that underground economy, that we could build a new alternative economy and compete with the mainstream directly. And so I was very inspired by that idea, and I've kind of taken it and applied it to everything. We need new ways of schooling. We need new ways of healthcare. We need new, you know, everything that they have, we need to build a parallel to it. We need to build a counter system to it. And it's going to take time. And I don't have all the tools per se, but there are people working in the tech area that are trying to build the new phones and the new computers and the privacy tools. There are people who are focused on growing food and building new food systems outside of the mainstream food systems. And I think that's what we really need to think about. You know, the thing about the banks is, imagine that you found out today you couldn't get the money out of your bank without the new digital ID, the new Mexican, whatever they call it, right? Or what if your bank said you can't come inside or even withdraw your money, whether online or not, without proof of vaccination, right? For some people, that's a line they're not going to want to cross, right? Those things can and will happen. We already saw this during...
They're already happening.
They're already happening. Like, and Mexico was lucky in a lot of ways, but there are places around the world where people literally could not work, could not travel, could not drive, couldn't see their kids, families pulled apart, you know, people, just all kind of insanity that thankfully most of Mexico didn't have to deal with. But that doesn't mean it will always be that way, you know. And so one of the reasons why I am so grateful and thankful to be here in Mexico and building community and connecting with people like yourself is because I think there's an opportunity, and this is what I write about in the book too, that I think Mexico is one of the places that with enough movement and consciousness raising that it could stay free, and that it could, because, you know, Mexico is behind in some places in terms of technology, right? Like Mexico City is not as much, it's more modern in that way, but you know, you go to any small town and some places don't have any internet, right? Or there's very little bit of cell service. So there's places as well, like in Chiran and others, where people have rose up and took back their communities. To me, when I see that and I think about what's coming, it's like maybe there's an opportunity to build enough consciousness and resistance here that some places start to say, no, we don't want the 5G and we don't necessarily want all of the new technology, right? But if there's no conversation, I think people are going to walk blindly right into it because we're so excited by the digital tools. Everybody wants the latest, newest thing, right? We've seen it happen in the US, and now people are starting to like, wait, maybe we went too far in that direction, and now people are starting to rethink it. But at this point, we've already given up so much, like it's kind of hard for people to go back because they're already so plugged into the system. But the book is trying to ask people to think about that. What would you do if you couldn't access your money? What would you do if you couldn't go to the grocery store and get any more food? What would you do, if they start pushing the shots again on your kids in school and all these different things, and even outside of COVID, just in general, this is the agenda. They might use COVID or another pandemic. They might use the climate. They might use whatever, a terrorist attack. It could be anything. But the point is they're going to do everything they can to push us further in that direction. And honestly, most people, they believe they want it. And I don't think people want it once we're there and like, oh my God, there's no more privacy. There's no more real freedom. And now they have control of everything on the internet. And, it's going to be an interesting coming years for sure.
There's three concepts that are very, very important that you somehow mentioned that are unschooling, unbanking, and permaculture. Talk to me about it.
Yeah, so this is one of the new chapters in the update to the book. And so for one with unbanking, right, I'll start with unschooling. Unschooling is a term that is becoming more and more popular. And it's basically the idea of, depropagandizing the kids, like cleaning the minds of the kids, taking them out of, so for example, you have mainstream school, then you have homeschooling, right? Homeschooling obviously is they're getting educated at home. Maybe you have a couple of students being taught by a tutor or a parent just teaching the kid, right? Unschooling takes that idea, but it also kind of takes it further. Unschooling sometimes also involves like traveling, teaching kids through education by experience. Yeah. And that's the main philosophy behind it, is that instead of just only book learning or repeat what I say, can you repeat these facts? You teach them by life, just like living. And honestly, some of these unschooled kids that I've met, like they're on another level. Like these kids, because kids are capable of so much, but our society teaches us to kind of talk to them like they're little babies and they can understand everything, right? Not give them like the credit, the abilities that they have. I think kids are a lot more capable of understanding the world around them if you communicate to them in an effective way and in an honest way. Instead, people try to hide so much from the kids, right? So I think that the unschooling idea is trying to just take them away from that propaganda system of the mainstream schooling. And we've also, in our travels, we've learned about things like forest schooling. This is kind of different too. It's like people who are similar idea, homeschooling, unschooling, but there's more of like an outdoors thing. So they teach kids how to build a fire, how to, survive outside, or just they spend time in the forest, different things like that. And I think what's happening is parents, especially during COVID, where a lot of parents were like, I'm not sending my kids there if they have to wear a mask or if they have to take a shot, and where they don't want them to stay at home and do the remote learning on the computer because it's not really working for them. Parents started looking for other options. And so homeschooling, unschooling, forest schooling, world schooling is kind of the traveling idea too. And if these are new terms to people, I encourage people to learn more about it because we've been meeting more and more families from all over the world who are starting to think in these ways. And so that's unschooling. I think that's really important for what we're facing because obviously the way they're going to spread this message is by they're coming for the children's minds. I mean, absolutely. Like that's the key to the coming generations. If they can indoctrinate them and turn the youth against us, the older generations, then it's like we're just the crazy old people who don't get it, right? Yeah. And then the young ones kind of unknowingly push straight to the technocratic state.